in 1943. Corn production during the war increased 25%, an average crop of about 553 million bushels each year during the war. In 1945, farm income was higher than ever before. For the first time in 20 years, Iowa farms did not face a continued economic crisis that threatened their survival. They paid off debts, improved their homes, and bought new machinery. Home appliances proliferated. And farm families got themselves electric stoves, running water, maybe even a vacuum cleaner. The gap in living standards between cities and farms narrowed during World War II. When farmers benefited from increased prices, they faced a serious labor shortage. Iowa lost 70,000 farm workers during the war who went to military service or moved to cities to work in better paid jobs in ordnance plants or shipyards or wherever. Many left farming permanently, their labor replaced by machinery. Farmers as old as 83 turned out to assist their neighbors harvest crops in 1943. Families relied on their daughters to drive tractors and complete other chores. Thousands of girls did work normally done by their fathers or their brothers. Labor shortages led to the adoption of tractors during the war. By the middle of World War II, there was one tractor for every 218 acres of crops. Faye Wookie and her husband Adrian farmed 240 acres in Montgomery County. This won't be surprising. She said, "We all worked really hard. We woke every morning at 5 a.m. and many nights we didn't have supper till 10 p.m. Their children assisted them with farm work. She also helped in the fields. Everyone labored all the time," she wrote. "There is no gender discrimination in the farm business," she humbly recalled. In mid-1945, the Rural Electrification Agency, which was building electrical lines into the countryside, finally reached them, and electricity brightened their lives. "It was the greatest thing that ever happened to farmers," she wrote. They spent the war years paying off debts, buying land and equipment, and enjoying their good fortune after a couple decades of struggle. An unusual labor force helped with the labor shortage during the war. There were 2 POW camps, one in southern Iowa, one in northern Iowa. And a very unusual labor force helped solve the increasingly dire worker shortage. The towns of Algona and Clarinda had POW camps that housed captured enemy soldiers. Hundreds of thousands of Germans and Italians were taken prisoner during the war and sent to the United States. The first POW camps had been in southern and southwestern states, but large numbers of prisoners had overwhelmed them, leading to the construction of additional camps in the Midwest. POWs had been brought to Iowa in 1943 from Nebraska and Missouri to help harvest crops. An abundance of prisoners and a shortage of farm workers led to the building of POW camps. Each could house about 3,000 prisoners. The first German and Italian prisoners arrived in early 1944. Japanese POWs came in 1945. Barbed wire fences surrounded both camps, and guard towers with machine gunners kept watch. Construction of camps set off an economic boom in both places. Prisoners weren't idle. They grew their own gardens, enjoyed decent food, libraries, and athletic competitions. Some studied English. Farmers employed them as workers when workers could not be found, and they paid their full wage to the U.S. Treasury. Some Iowa farms were desperate for workers. Only 1/4 of the workforce available as before the war. Prisoners completed field work, They harvested crops. They cut hay, built fences, detasseled corn. Demand for such labor was high, and smaller branch camps were established across the state to provide workers. World War II had a profound impact upon the United States and Iowa. The war ended the agonies of the Great Depression, and it brought economic prosperity back to the state, even as it exacted a high cost. 8,398 Iowa men gave their lives. The war accelerated the migration of people from farms to towns. And it also narrowed the living standards, as mentioned before, between the rural countryside and urban America. The conflict left the United States, left Americans with healthy savings and high hopes for the future. It brought women and minority groups into high-paying industrial jobs for the first time, if only for a few years. The war also raised expectations for African Americans and helped lay the foundation for the post-war civil rights movement, which was often led by military veterans from World War II. World War II helped set the path for Iowa for the rest of the century. Thank you. Do you have any questions? Yes.
Rationing, how did they determine rationing for families? I came from a very large family.
It would have been determined by probably how old your kids were, by how big the family was. You would have given a certain number of stamps or a certain amount of the ability to get sugar or butter or whatever based on family size.
And age too?
I'm sure age, yeah. Obviously somebody like me is going to eat a lot more than, a 5-year-old kid, so I'm sure there were modifications there. My grandfather had a book of ration stamps that his family didn't use during World War II. They had a whole bunch of them. They were really frugal. Germans in Southern California who always were convinced the sky was falling, and so you even saved your ration book 50 years after the war was over.
I have my ration book.
Yeah, yours, okay. Yeah. Well, I'm sure an historical society would love to have it if no one in your family wants a question.
Who issued these books, from the state or the government?
The federal government would have issued them.
And so you got them every month, or?
I think every month. Yeah.
So did you have to apply for them?
I think based on family size, they were just given to you and you went somewhere and picked them up. Darcy, do you know more about this? The ration stamps during World War II?
I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
I'd have to research that.
These are detailed questions that no one's asked me before. So I'm doing the best I can. Yes, sir.
Well, they had shoe stamps, because I lost one of my brother's shoes, and we had to go to a neighbor to get some stamps so he could get another pair of shoes.
Yeah. Shoe stamps, sugar, canned vegetables, meat, butter,
Yeah.
gasoline, rubber. Yeah. We've not seen anything like that since World War II.
How illegal, you hear about people getting black market tractors. So a lot of times on the farm, if the neighbor couldn't afford to buy his tractor when his lottery came up to buy a new tractor, then they would trade that to neighbors.
There's a black market in tires and all sorts of stuff. If you had extra something, you might trade it. Kind of like my wife and I have a neighbor. We have 4 acres of hay we don't use. So we basically give it to him, and in exchange, if we need something dug up or plowed, we give him a call.
So not necessarily frowned upon. If it was done by trading, as long as it wasn't done for profit, maybe.
Probably. I would assume the federal government had better things to do than to crack down on Iowans who bought a tractor when it wasn't your turn.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure that's out there. There is Lisa Ocean, last name O-S-S-I-A-N, has a book on Iowa and World War II, the home fronts of Iowa. It is about the only thing we really have. So if I can't give you that answer, you can feel free to email me. I'll go home and I'll look it up in the book. And I can give you that. But you're shaking your head, Darcy, that's it. It's
Yeah,
like
she's
deep
got a
water.
good book, and I was thinking that the rationing actually continued. It was some things after the war, because I interviewed a family up by Lake City where the father, after he returned from the war to farm, he was more of a red guy, red tractor guy, and he really wanted International Harvester, but because they still had rationing on tractors, he had to become a John Deere man. As a bad situation.
There are worse things.
Well, that's what it is.
Yes, sir.
The detail on your book, on your research in this throughout the book is just amazing. I mean, I learned so much in that chapter on World War II. If that ammunition plant at Ankeny employed 20,000 people, I think that would be the biggest plant in Iowa today. I don't think there's anybody that employs 20,000 people.
No, there were a lot of plants that went under in the 70s and 80s during the farm crisis. There was a significant farm machinery production sector over in southeast Iowa that employed 60, 70, 80,000 people, which is most of the time.
Wow.
Yeah. That 20,000 might have been the biggest factory in Iowa history.
The other thing I wondered, you haven't mentioned it so far, but did the GI Bill come out of World War II?
Yep.
Is that when it started?
Passed in 1944 as a post-war readjustment. There were after World War I, there had been the government spending had fallen, men had come back to work, come back home, demobilization had been a mess, and the economy fell into just a rough recession for about a year and a half. That's so bad, and I'll write a book on Des Moines right now, that in Des Moines, hundreds of men every week went to the Salvation Army or went to the police station and slept there because they had no money. So they wanted to avoid that after World War II. So the GI Bill was passed so that men would maybe get training or go to school, and the economy would not be overwhelmed as the country demobilized. So that's why you get the GI Bill, which still exists today. I have students in the GI Bill. Some of you may have benefited from it. And some of my best students are in the GI Bill. Many of them are teachers. Yes?
Celebrities in Iowa during the war. Any of that information?
Celebrities.
Like Richard Nixon was trained here at Fort Lemoyne or someplace.
I did know that Richard Nixon was in the Navy. He was stationed overseas during the war. He could have got some training here. I would not be
I
worried.
think it was a Tumbler.
It was the tumbler.
And then Bob Feller, the heater from Van Meter, he went to war.
Okay, thank you for saving me as usual. Please come to all my talks if I can answer. Other questions?
There were air raid in almost every town, weren't there? Civilian people have watched for air raid. I remember pulling the shades at night, and so you didn't have lights in your showing, and people would go out and get on top of a building and watch.
Civil defense.
It was especially bad right in California before he said.
Yeah, and I wonder why Iowa? I mean, we weren't subject to German or Japanese planes coming all the way into Iowa.
Well, people were scared. Maybe they were afraid of sabotage or something like that. But yeah, much more of a threat on the East Coast to West Coast. But that happened as far as I know everywhere. Darcy?
Yes, you're correct. And then those balloons, do you know that story?
Oh, yeah.
Those balloons did make it from Japan, and I don't know if they exploded, but they definitely made it to Iowa. So
The Japanese had outfitted balloons with explosive devices with the hope they'd send it over to the United States and maybe they'd set fires in the American West on fire that would ravage the country. Very few of them got to the United States, and only a tiny handful ever caused it. Other questions that I can struggle with?
Did you run across anything in your research in regards to Iowa industry, like John Deere factories and stuff, if they converted to wartime, machinery and stuff like that, or they stick with plows and tractors and stuff, or they help with like tanks and that sort of thing?
As far as I know, most production during the war was oriented to wartime production. But in terms of specific factories and such, I can't.
Yeah, there's an exhibit at the John Deere Museum in Waterloo where they talk about how they had some armored tractors and things like that that they did made during wartime, so.
The Detroit famously produced B-24s, tanks and such. Liberty ships in American ports as well were produced by them. Assembly line type, heavy force.
In the Rock Island area, I know I've seen pictures